Hey, we're here in the new Jewish cemetery in Prague. It's located in Zizkov, and this is a slow walking tour video of Prague, where I start at one location and I make my way to another destination. Today we're going to be started at the cemetery here, and we're going to walk down the hill through Zizkov and up to Vitkov monument. There's a couple different Jewish cemeteries in Prague. There's the old Jewish cemetery, which is located near Old Town. And then there's the new Jewish cemetery in Zizkov. And this one is pretty well known because Franz Kafka is buried there, so a lot of people go to visit that one. And then this is the old Jewish cemetery in Zizkov. It was first established in 1680 to deal with a lot of bodies that had to be buried from the plague. And as is custom within Jewish tradition, graves cannot be moved. So a lot of times there'll be graves buried on top of graves. So you'll see this kind of staggered tombstone effect. And so underneath here, there's tens of thousands of people buried. The one in Old Town, it's estimated around 100,000 people could be buried there. And in this one here, this is the old Jewish cemetery, so I'm not sure. But the new Jewish cemetery, which is also in Prague, has about 40,000 people. The original cemetery was actually much larger than this one. And in the early 1960s, it was mostly converted into a giant park, which is now known as Mahlarovi Sady. And in the second half of the 1980s, they built the Zizkov TV tower, which we'll get a look at when we exit. And this is a huge television tower that was erected right on top of this cemetery. And during this construction, a large part of the cemetery was dug up, and the tombstones were knocked down and broken, and the rest of the cemetery was made into this park, which we can see here as we're leaving. All of this area here would have also been the cemetery. And you've probably been hearing these kids screaming, because there is actually a preschool right next to the cemetery here. So you got these nice pandas, a nice panda mural, nice juxtaposition to the dark Jewish cemetery in Zizkov. But here we'll get a better look at the TV tower and what was constructed here. So the TV tower is a really popular tourist destination, and there's actually little babies on it. You can see the little babies crawling up it that artist David Cherny made. And there's a really good restaurant up there, as well as an overlook with a great view of the city. And the restaurant's actually pretty reasonable up there as well. So a good place to get an ice cream or something and see the city on a hot day. I do believe they also have a hotel room. It's just one hotel room that you can rent as well in the Zizkov TV tower. So now we'll take a walk through Zizkov, also known as Prague 3. Zizkov's been around since the 19th century, was created primarily as a residential area. There's some industrial areas as well of it, but it's primarily known to be a bit gritty, working class area, bohemian type of lifestyle. And the street we'll be coming to in a minute, once we get to the bottom of this hill, is called Borzhivojova. And this street is well known in Prague for having the most pubs of any street in all of Czech Republic. And there's actually a book written about a son and his father that try to get a drink in every bar on Borzhivojova Street. So within Zizkov, this area, you can imagine, it does get a little bit rowdy at nights. A lot of parties, a lot of late nights, a lot of fun to be had in this neighborhood. And this here is Borzhivojova Street. If you're interested in reading the book about Prague and this street in particular, it's called Necessary Errors by Caleb Crane. The street is named after Duke Borzhivoj, the first of Bohemia, and he was an important historical figure in the early history of the Czech lands and the founder of the Přemysled dynasty, which played a significant role in shaping the Czech state. So there's a ton of different bars on this street. Some I'd recommend, of course, would be Bukowski's, which is more international crowd. To the right here, across the street, there's a place called Bohužel Bar, which is kind of has the old feel of Borzhivojova. It's like a punk bar. Nad Viktorku, if you want to get yelled at while you're ordering beer, you can go there for a really authentic old school Czech feel. And now we're heading down the hill towards the Lipanska tram stop. We can see coming up on the left here the Church of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And this is a pretty typical Art Nouveau church. Really quite nice though. You can take a look at that later on as well. But it's only about 100 years old. But you can see those types of lines and ornamentation, which are pretty typical of Art Nouveau architecture. And there's a lot more Art Nouveau hiding out on a lot of these buildings. It's especially nice a lot of times looking at doors. I really like looking at old doors. Wow, that guy is flying. Up until the last couple decades, this district of Prague had a pretty bad reputation, meaning it was associated a lot with crime and kind of rambunctious drunkenness because of all the bars here. But of course the district also is home to to a lot of different immigrant populations. So of course there's most likely some racism also built into that connotation of this being a, quote, bad neighborhood. But within the last couple decades, we've seen this neighborhood get significant renovations, and the cost of apartments has skyrocketed. It's becoming basically Vinohrady, which is one of the most expensive areas of Prague, juts up right next to it. So it's coming more and more like that. Here's this goofy little apartment building in the middle of all this. I always thought was strange. These little cartoon apartments. But yeah, now if you're looking for like a 2+1 in an area like this, an apartment, you're probably looking at least 300,000 euro, 400,000 euro. The cost of apartments has grown faster in Prague than almost anywhere in Europe. And these central locations that once were considered bad, so to speak, obviously, these shot up in value 600, 700% in the last couple decades. So a lot of the original community that lived here has now been displaced by speculators and people moving in who want to be close to the center of Prague because it's a great location with access to a lot of parks. And of course the district itself, Zizkov, is named after Jan Zizka, who is a famous military leader and strategist, important in Czech history. He played a very important role during the Hussite Wars, and he was primarily known for innovative military tactics, probably the most well-known of which were these things called war wagons. And these were essentially wagons that were used as these kind of mobile fortresses. And it won him a lot of victories during the Hussite Wars. Another thing about Jan Zizka was that he got an eye shot out with an arrow, so he famously wore an eye patch on one eye. And despite this disability, he still had remarkable success as a military leader. He'd later convert to Hussitism and converted to the Hussite movement, which was a religious and social reform movement that arose in the Kingdom of Bohemia. And he became a key military leader and commander of the Hussite forces during the Hussite Wars. And these had to do with all sorts of religious and political tensions we can't possibly all get into. But a major victory for Jan Zizka was the Battle of Vitkov Hill in 1420, which helped establish his reputation as a master military strategist. So now we're going to be headed towards this huge statue of Zizka on a horse, and it stands atop Vitkov Hill in Prague. Now currently all the entrances, as you can see, have been closed off. So either I go left or I go right. Just gonna head down the street. We're on Konyavova Street, which is a really, really busy street going through Zizkov, Lower Zizkov, this is called, because it's down the hill. And we'll wander down this street a bit and see if we can find an entrance later on. If all else fails, we can go to a really famous bar if they're open, and we can walk through and get to the other side. I know a sneak attack that we can take through the bar. The bar itself is called U Vystreleného Oka, or the shot out eye. And that's also in reference to Jan Zizka, who got his eye shot out. But it also became a really legendary bar in Zizkov because it was made famous after it hosted many of the Charter 77 meetings during communism. And if you're unaware of what Charter 77 was, it was a human rights movement in Czechoslovakia, formed in 1977. They advocated for basic human rights, freedom of expression, and democratic reforms. And in 1977, in the former Czechoslovakia, if you weren't on board with what the Communist Party was doing, you were considered a dissident, and there'd be all sorts of special treatment for you if you were caught disseminating certain types of books or music. They'd give you a job in some remote village in a sardine factory or something, carrying grain. So in the 1970s, there was a growing discontent with a lot of citizens here who had to be living underneath this oppressive communist regime. So they started having meetings. And one of the places they started having meetings was at this bar, the Shot Out Eye. And this is it right here. Looks like it's open, however, during the day is not the time to come here. It's better to come at night. You can even see a little program there, and there's concerts and these sort of things. But it's got this amazing feel of beer garden, these old brick walls. But also there's a interior, typical pub sort of space. But a legendary pub. If you can get a beer here, I'd highly recommend it. And then you can just sneak attack right out of there onto the trail here, which will take you up the hill to Vitkov Monument. Still have a little bit of a ways to go, but a really quiet morning, not too many people out. We've been getting a lot of rain, so the trees are nice and happy and green. And it's a really nice walk up the hill, albeit a little bit tiring after a while, because you are going uphill the entire way. But as you go up, you get increasingly better and better views of Zizkov, and then better views of the entire Prague skyline as well. Here to the right is all that construction that was preventing us from going up the normal steps, the normal way. But like I said before, Konyevova Street, as you could see, there's still some pretty beat up buildings on that area. And so even though it is really centrally located, and it's just right on the other side of the hill from Karlin, one of the most expensive districts in Prague now, there's still some beat up, decrepit old buildings in this neighborhood. So there's going to be probably a lot of construction here for the years to come. But I can only imagine it also goes the way of Karlin and slowly just gets more and more gentrified. But this hill itself has been the site of a lot of different political ambitions. In the 1920s, the first idea was made to build a monument on top of the hill for Czech people who had died fighting in World War I, but also as Czechoslovakia gained independence. So it was intended to honor Czechoslovak legionnaires who fought in the war. Then in the 1930s, the construction of the monument faced delays because there just wasn't enough money. And the plans kind of changed as well. So instead of commemorating the Czechoslovak soldiers who fought for independence, they also wanted to start including those who died in the Hussite Wars, who were also led by Jan Zizka. But then in the 1940s, the construction of that completely ended because there was a communist takeover of Czechoslovakia. And of course the communists modified the monument's original design to align more with their ideology. And what they wanted to do was use the monument as a mausoleum for Klement Gottwald, the communist leader. However, these plans were never actually realized. From the 1960s to the 1980s, the monument would have further alterations made to it to accommodate this absolutely colossal statue of Jan Zizka. And the statue itself would be completed in 1950, but then it wouldn't be erected on the hill until 1955. And the area and the site was largely used for military parades to display Soviet military power. So once we get up there, I think you'll get a clear view. And there's kind of a stark emptiness that you associate with these types of authoritarian regimes. And it seems like the perfect place to hold some sort of giant pro-military show of force. When I first got here, around 2002, I guess, 2003, the area was still really in disrepair, and I actually saw a performance by this experimental theater group called Novogo Fronta, and they were this really odd and surreal experimental theater group, and they did a performance inside the actual monument area. Here we can get the first view of Zizkov there You can see the TV tower. That's where we started, off on the horizon there. And these views only get nicer as we get farther and farther up the hill. Not seeing too many people out walking here. It is, known to be kind of a shady area if you're coming here at night alone. You might want to have your wits about you, for sure. But anyway, during this performance of Novogo Fronta, they had all the lights off, and there was this little Russian ballerina with a Satan mask on, kind of coming out of the shadows. It was really terrifying. And they were selling beers, and you could see what appeared to be, it was meant to be a mausoleum, so it seems like there's caskets and stuff inside. And people are kind of openly, putting their beers on the caskets and these sort of things. But I think part of that was also to be openly disrespectful to the former communist regime as well, which was certainly the general sentiment at the time, and still the same sentiment today. Here we can see, getting a little bit higher up, a little bit nicer view as we keep on climbing this hill, up the hill. The vision quest to the top of the hill to see the Jan Zizka statue. It's one of the largest equestrian statues in all of Europe. And the sculpture was made by Bohumil Kafka, no relation to Franz Kafka. But Bohumil was a Czech sculptor who was widely known for his contributions to Czech art and culture, mainly his giant, monumental public sculptures. And Kafka was associated with the Art Nouveau movement, which we've seen a couple times already on this walk. And his sculptures are kind of characterized by their emphasis on these very, very flowing lines and organic forms, but also very intricate details. And he'd incorporate elements of symbolism and decorative art also into his sculptures. Kafka was born in Prague and studied at the Academy of Fine Arts in Prague, and that's where he learned how to sculpt. He's made a lot of different monumental public sculptures throughout all of the Czech Republic, but most notably is the giant equestrian statue of Jan Zizka, located here on Vitkov Hill in Prague. And I can only imagine how difficult it must have been for a sculptor like Bohumil Kafka, who has to create public sculptures of people, and he has to always accommodate all these different political powers. So when you're dealing with public sculpture and public spaces, especially one like this one atop Vitkov Hill, where you can see all of the city, and all of the city can see you as well, it becomes very important what you put upon these hills. So if for a sculptor like Kafka, he has to kind of navigate all these different political alliances and ideologies and create something that he wants to make as an artist, but also pleases the regime in power. And here we can get our first look at the back of the monument itself. And as we walk around it, you're going to see just how kind of stark and empty the building feels. Even this little fountain here feels kind of out of place. It's not sure what it's doing there. But like I said before, this would be the site of a lot of different military shows of force under communism. They would bring all the troops here to do their pomp and pageantry. But otherwise, it's a very minimal building, very cold building, and thinking of it as a mausoleum only further perpetuates this idea of coldness, detachment, concrete, lack of color, lack of life. And then out front, we have this incredibly macho and powerful, huge statue of Jan Zizka on a horse. A person from a completely different time than the person who designed this building. And I think who he was also stands in stark contrast to what this building has become. And don't get me wrong, there's been a lot of renovations to this building, but something about it still just seems so cold. Well, it's not hard to see what it is. It's all gray and empty. Here we can see this area here is probably where they would have a lot of those military parades and those sort of things. And there it is. The statue at the front of it all. Almost completely empty out here. Kind of eerie how quiet it is up here. Not exactly the biggest tourist location. You can see the TV tower off there on the horizon where we started. And that gives you a better view of it. Not gonna lie, does feel like something you would see in North Korea or something like that. You can imagine a bunch of soldiers doing synchronized marching in this area. One final view of it. And then right near here, there's actually this little lookout post. You just come down the steps here. And here, in the official monument, everything is very, very clean and minimal and refined and gray and concrete. And then there's this little area in the woods, well, not in the woods, tucked away in the trees. And as you'll see, it's kind of a place where I think teenagers go to hang out, write their names on the wall. But it's also a nice little lookout of the city that I always like. You can see Carlene down there. And a view of the castle. So, thanks for watching today. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you like this sort of thing. And we'll see you next time.